So obviously, not every single drawing needs to be fully rendered in value in order to be a great drawing. However, if you are interested in the old masters and you are wondering, how do the greats like Michelangelo or Pru'dhon get their fantastic results, even though they're quite different from each other, this video is for you because I will break down what are the 3 main considerations that they will always look at in order to create some great value drawings. Before we dive in case we haven't met yet, my name is Carolin and I'm a practicing artist and instructor, and I help artists who are tired of their technical and creative limitations master drawing once and for all so they can finally enjoy the freedom that comes with meaningfully expressing themselves. If that sounds like you, be sure to subscribe to stay connected. And if you're really ready to leave your limitations behind and take it one step further, I linked a free masterclass in the description below in which I show you how to set yourself up from step A to Z to finally get to that growth level that you are desiring for yourself. But for now, let's get into this lesson. So the thing with drawing is that we don't want to get caught up on what it is that we're drawing. Like, we don't need to know a ton of things about the figure in order to draw it well. Sure, we need to know anatomy, it's going to be helpful, but that is not the most crucial part about drawing. The most crucial part about drawing is that we're crystal clear on the how, not the what. So what do I mean by that? The how means I understand the process, and that in different sections of the process, we have different things that we pay attention to. So in this first phase, I am always paying attention to the gesture. Now, what is the gesture? The gesture is basically recording in the simplest form, meaning via line, what the body is doing. So we're recording how long a certain body part is and what the angle of a certain body part is. Like, what angle is the lower arm? What angle is the upper arm? And how long are either of these? So that is the gestural consideration that I make at every beginning of every drawing. And I do this with kind of organic, flowy marks. And once I have all of those lines as placeholders for the body parts, then I switch into the second part of the drawing. And in that second part of the drawing, I consider the shapes. So lines that are kind of just hanging on the page now get linked up with each other to become shapes. If you look at me dealing with this arm here, I'm first considering, did I get the length correct? Did I get the angles correct? Just with lines. And if I got it wrong, like on the first pass, I got it wrong, so I'm making a few corrections. I'm making that correction just with the lines. And now that this feels better to me, I can go and allow myself to add some more lines, creating this gesture, moving it into a shape. So see, now there are 2 lines next to each other, and that creates a very simple shape. So as we roll into shapes, we want to make sure that we keep them very general at first. A general ovoid for the rib cage, a very simple bendy channel for the arm, an egg shape for the head, etc. They should be characteristic enough, like an arm tapers towards the end and gets wider towards the torso, but I don't have any specifics yet in my shapes. And that's important. That's part of that process, knowing, hey, first I need to get the simplest version established. Then I make it a little bit more complex, but still manageable. And once I have that, I'll roll into that specificity, and that's if you have some anatomy knowledge, that's where that comes in really handily. So see how it gradually builds on top of the previous phase, and like that you don't have to tackle everything at once. And even when I put that anatomical information in, I call those often the sub-shapes, like the breasts or the shoulder muscles. I put those in very generally and very lightly because a lot of the stuff will be erased out. You want to understand that information as the foundation that you're going to draw over to get the form to appear. So this is now when we're starting to get into the rendering and value territory, because we can create form with cross contours and plane changes, but we also can create form with value, which is the focus of this video, right? So once we've established that more specific underdrawing, let's take a look at those 3 principles I mentioned in the intro that all the old masters will consider. First, they'll consider where are my shadow shapes, then they'll figure out where are gradations and transitions out of the shadows into the lights, and then the last one will be the local value consideration. So local value is where is the pigment different in one zone from the other. So in this example, it's easy because her hair is much darker than her skin. So you can establish the local value of that with just a pass of tone. Another area where you clearly have a different local value is her top or her underwear. Those are clearly darker than her skin tone. So rather than trying to juggle all 3 principles at once, the shadow, the gradation, and the local value, it's good to split up into phases. So starting with the local value is easy because it's so simple to recognize. So again, at this phase, when I'm putting in that local tone or the local value, that means the same thing, I'm not thinking about varying, okay, it's dark over here and light over there. I'm really only interested in, okay, the hair is dark, the bra is dark, and the underwear is dark, and I'm differentiating it from the value of the skin. So to best judge how dark that darker local value is, you want to place your eye directly on the area where one value is meeting the other. So let's look at her bra strap next to her shoulder. We want to compare the shoulder zone to the bra strap zone, letting our eye jump back and forth between the two to really understand what is the value difference between the two. And as I am laying in that local value, I'm making sure it's a flat value, meaning the entire shape for the bra is the same exact value. A gradation is different. A gradation changes from darker to lighter. That is going to be a different consideration when I'm in a different phase of the drawing. Again, the more you split up what it is you're juggling, the easier it is to actually address it. It's harder to juggle local value and gradations and shadows all at once. It's easier to address them in phases. So here I'm addressing the phase of only local color of the underwear, making it a flat value. I'm not working with gradations at this point. All right, so now that I have my first phase of the value equation on the paper, I can move into another phase of building my full value, and that would be plotting out where the shadow patterns on this subject, on this very figure are. The important thing about plotting out your shadow patterns is that this is also not necessarily right away about lightness and darkness variations. This is really about mapping out the edges of where the shadow boundaries are. So if you think about the logic behind this, if you have the light coming from the top left and there's a split open egg, there are going to be zones of this egg, of this form, that aim at the light source, and they're going to be zones of that egg that are turned away from the light source, so where the light rays just cannot reach this form. Us paying attention to where those edges are, where those planes change from being reached from the light rays to not being reached from the light rays anymore, that we call shadow mapping. And it's logical based on the underlying form. So the better you understand form, 3D volume, the easier it'll be for you to recognize where the shadow edges are. So we have a form shadow, which is the shadow on the form, and then we have a cast shadow, which is the shadow part where the egg or whatever body limb you're drawing with is blocking the light from reaching whatever is next to it. The reason why we want to be aware of both of those is because their edges, which are the ones you're plotting out right now, they're a little bit different. The form shadow edges are generally a little bit softer, and the cast shadow edges are generally a little bit more crisp. So let's pick this apart so you really understand the logic behind this. Cast shadows exist because something is blocking the light from reaching that particular area. So in this case, the lower pelvis is blocking the light from reaching the upper thigh, creating a cast shadow. Cast shadows, as I said, they're appearing crisp and they always will take on the form of what they're falling onto. So in the thigh, they'll take on the roundness of that thigh. Form shadow edges exist because the form has reached the point where it's turning away from the light source so much that the light rays from the light source can't reach it anymore. So if you think of the torso as an egg form, that part of the right side of the egg is not being reached by the light anymore. So right in this line, that is where the form shadow begins. So the form shadow is on the form itself. So as you look at my shadow mapping phase here on this drawing, I drew the edges of the shadow pattern and I tried to inform how soft or sharp the edge is depending on whether I'm dealing with a cast shadow or a form shadow. And then I fill in this pattern with a single value. So again, I'm not varying the lightness and darkness difference based on gradations yet. I'm only filling in the pattern, and the only thing that is varied is the degree of softness or crispness of the shadow pattern edge. So that is a really big deal because this shadow pattern can do so much for our value drawings to appear realistic and to even start building that 3D effect, even though we're not doing any quote-unquote shading. Now the shading, what we mostly think about is us building the transitions or the gradations from the shadow into the light. Now on this egg example, there will be parts of the egg that are super bright because those facets of the egg are angling most directly at the light. And then there will be zones within that light. They're not quite as light as the highlight. They're not shadows yet, but they're also not highlights. So we call those the midtones. So we want to gradate or transition out of the shadows into the light mass. So see how I'm shading out of the shadow into the light mass, building up to the highlights or fizzling out toward the highlights, if you so will. And for that, you want to be well acquainted with your medium. Meaning you want to have practiced how you can get a super light tone on your paper with the type of pencil that you have chosen, and whether you'd want to use the side of it or the tip of it. Mostly if we want to have a very soft shading, we want to use the side of our pencil, and it needs to be a kind of a softer pencil, especially if you pair it with the right kind of paper. Sometimes if you have very rough paper and your pencil is too hard, you can't get those soft gradations. So that's what I mean by being super aware of your material. When I get these super soft gradations, it's also important to have the right kind of motion that you touch down on the paper with. The way I think of it is that the pencil is an airplane coming down for the landing and then lifting back up off of the paper. So it's kind of like a U-shape motion. I'm not keeping the tip of the pencil on the paper the whole time, shifting it back and forth. It's this kind of up and down and easing into the pressure and easing back out of the pressure that creates that softness that we want for those gradations. In this drawing, I have to catch up a little bit on the face because I forgot to do the shadow mapping. So I will spend the next few seconds right here just plotting out the shadow edges on the face, which are much smaller, of course, so it's a bit more of a complex place in the body, but the principle is still the same. So I'm still plotting out the edges of the pattern and then fill it in one single tone, and then continue with my considerations of where are my gradations and are there zones of the face that need a different local value. To complete out the gradations and transitions phase, I also want to look for some accents. Where within the shadow mask do I have what we call pitch shadows, which are zones where the light cannot reach at all. So underneath the egg, where the egg is touching the ground, no light rays can bounce into that little space. The last phase of the drawing process is really all about nuance. So come back to understanding the form as different facets that are angled differently to the light source. So there will be facets that are angled directly at the light source, like this little plane right here. That would be my highlight plane. And then those others are slightly angled away from the light, but still aiming at the light. Those are our midtones. And then there are the planes that are aimed away so much, which are the true shadows. So that gives us three distinct zones: highlights, midtones, and shadows. And modeling those midtones based on our logical understanding of, okay, this is angling at the light, this one not so much, will help us not stay confused in terms of how light or dark something should be. And like that, I never have to try and juggle everything at once, getting frustrated because I'm confused about what it is I'm looking at. I have a clear roadmap that I follow from the beginning to the end. I hope you liked this lesson. If you did, be so kind and give me a thumbs up so other artists like you can find it in the algorithm as well. And I'd be curious to know which of these insights was the most surprising for you. So as I mentioned before, if you're ready to leave your limitations behind, there is that free masterclass waiting for you in which I show you how you need to set yourself up to get that growth that you're really wishing for. And I hope I'll see you in the next video.